I mean, you have to be Las Vegas buffet hungry in order to make a business grow.
It's time to eat. Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Brandstetter, founder and podcast producer at Max Podcasting. And you can email me at max@maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. This is episode 250 Trace, and today's guest is Robert Forto. Robert is quite simply maybe the most fascinating person on the planet. Robert is a dog trainer and dog musher out of the wilderness of Alaska. He has 35 dogs, 35 sled dogs, and he trains dogs and has a kennel called Alaska Dog Works. He has built his business through podcasting and radio, through First Paw Media and his flagship show, Dog Works Radio. And in this episode, we talk all things Alaska, using a podcast to build your business. Sound familiar? Robert's adventures in the lower 48 and around the world, and even underwater, looking upwards at some pretty cool things. And all the thrill rides of a lifetime, including roller coasters, rock music, and of course, training for the Iditarod. It is Dr. Robert. Enjoy the snow. Alrighty, we are here with our latest contestant for most interesting man in the world, Robert Forto, coming to us live from New York. No, I'm just kidding. Coming to us from Alaska, and just one of the most interesting and fascinating and inspiring people you hear from. Really, really excited to dive into your story. Robert, thanks for joining. How you doing today?
I am well, Max. Thank you for having me on. It is a pleasure.
Perfect. And that I was fired up just hearing you say that. So I'm ready to run through a brick wall. I'm actually ready to sled dog through a brick wall, if you will. But we'll get to that in a little bit. But before that, I had so much trouble figuring out where to start with this, because we could start in a particular direction and go for literally 7-8 hours on any one of the areas of your lifetime. But one thing that I kept coming back to was rock and roll, and not just rock and roll, but rock and roller. So you and your wife do this thing called the Rock and Roller Tour, where when you come down to the lower 48, as it's called, you explore both rock concerts, but also roller coasters. Where did this genius idea come from in the first place?
Well, here in Alaska, we have to get on a plane for everything, and we might as well make the most of it when you fly down. And I don't know, I think it was 2015, 2016 or so, we said, hey, it's been a long time since we've each been on a roller coaster. Let's take a tour around America and just see how many roller coasters we can ride at once. So we headed down to Denver, where our son lives. We rented an F-150 Ford pickup truck, jumped in the truck, and just took off. We drove from Denver all the way to Maine all the way down to Texas, and then back up to Denver. So pretty much a triangle of the United States, about 7,500 miles in this enterprise rental that we had. And I tell you what, Max, I was scared to death to turn it in, because we had, I think, 137 miles or something on it when we picked it up. When we dropped it off, I pretty much handed them keys and ran out the front door.
I don't blame you. I'm scared just hearing that. But what an adventure! And I mean, you've built a lifetime around adventure. But these trips in particular, that's just awesome. I get chills thinking about it. Some of the things that you see are rock concerts and roller coasters. Start with rock concerts. If you could only see one band again play concerts, as many concerts as you want, but the same band for the rest of your life until you die, who would that band be?
Oh man, that's a tough one. We just got back from the Metallica show last weekend down in Phoenix. That's a highlight for sure. I've been a rock and roller since I was in, middle school or something like that. But I don't know, Max. I would probably have to say Foo Fighters. That's my wife's favorite band. We've probably seen them 10 or 12 times, or maybe even Godsmack. I'm a big Godsmack fan, or even Tool. I'm just naming them off here as we're going. Those are my top picks, but all of those guys put on an excellent show and well worth the money.
You got us into a lateralis here, but no, so many great bands there, and yeah, those are all on a bucket list to see, and some of those have taken hiatuses and then come back and performed over again. So it's really cool you've gotten to see them. What about on the rock and roller coaster side? So what is for anybody who has the thrill seeker roller coaster seeker gene, which I just made up, what's a roller coaster that you got to do before you kick the bucket?
There's one at Kings Island in southern Ohio called the Beast. It was my first roller coaster as a kid. I think I was 8 or 9 years old, well before they had those height requirements. And I remember hitting that roller coaster with my dad. And it is just an amazing coaster. And a couple of years ago, we were back down there. It was my first time ever riding in the very front car in the dark. And that by far was a bucket list item for sure. It is an amazing roller coaster.
Shout out the Beast, and shout out Ohio. You came prepared with your Ohio references. From Cleveland originally, spent much time in Cincinnati and Kings Island, and especially Montgomery and barbecue. But the Beast, I love the shout out there. On that Ohio note, have you done Cedar Point?
I have done Cedar Point. We did that our second rock and roller tour across America, and that was a fun one. There are just so many coasters there. I don't know, 15 or 20 coasters there. And luckily, every one of them were open when we were there. So it was a great time.
I feel like they keep building that. Like they're going to they build them so high at Cedar Point that there's going to be one that like takes you up to the moon. And then maybe probably takes you around the world on the way back too. But which one gives you the most adrenaline of those Cedar Point coasters?
Oh, man. They opened up a new one. I believe it's called Steel Vengeance or something like that the year after we were there. So we got to get back to Cedar Point for sure to ride that one. But I believe the one that they opened right before then was called Valraven. And that was a good one. That's one of those coasters that you go to the top right before the drop and they hang you there for a few seconds before it drops. So you're just sort of hanging down there looking at the bottom of the ground, 200 feet or so above ground. And I tell you what, when that drops, it's adrenaline.
Do you have any advice for anybody who, not pointing a finger at myself or anyone in particular, but for anyone who is either gets dizzy a little easily on coasters, or B, starts to get a little fear of heights when you talk about those super huge coasters? Do you have any advice for conquering those fears and having the ride of your life?
Oh, yeah. My wife is in that boat. She gets car sick, boat sick, the whole 9 yards, and she's a trooper. 100%. There's a roller coaster at Kings Dominion in Virginia. It's called the Intimidator 305. So it's 305 feet tall, one of the tallest ones in the United States. And Max, I tell you what, that was the first time we ever rode it when we were there. And both of us passed out on our way down because it's just going so fast. Like, I think it's 90 miles an hour or something like that. But some advice for you, definitely take those motion sick pills. Take them starting the night before. Don't just take them right before you enter the park. That really helps. We're also scuba divers, so we learned that trick going in pretty early. Take those pills the night before, and it'll really help.
Just when I thought I knew you, I creepy stalked you in preparation for this interview. I had no idea that you were scuba divers as well. So here we are, and we need to extend this for another half hour. Let's go from scuba to Alaska, which I guess you can scuba in Alaska as well. That just, I got the shivers. But Alaska. So you weren't born in Alaska, but it kind of feels like you spent a lot of time there. What brought you to Alaska in the first place?
Well, excellent story to tell here. It was 2010 or so, and we were living in Denver. We had just started our podcast the year before, had a sweet training center, the whole 9 yards. Our business was rocking and rolling, and I always had this crazy Iditarod dream. And for folks that don't know what Iditarod is, it's the longest sled dog race across Alaska, 1,000 miles by dog team. And I remember walking into the training center one day and I said to my wife, Michelle, hey, I think we should move to Alaska. And she kind of looked at me in a blank stare thinking, wow, we've got things going on pretty good here. Why in the world do you just want to uproot and go? And I thought, you got to do it. You got to chase those dreams, So we pretty much packed up the farm, if you will, and ended up here in August of 2010. And we can get into that much more if you'd like. But here we are 13 years later, almost, have a beautiful property here in the woods, have 35 sled dogs, and pretty much dogs and podcasting is my life.
I mean, words to live by. Same here. And not quite as many dogs or as many podcasts, but what an adventure. I'm stuck in the first part. It's one thing to pick up your life and move somewhere, but to move to Alaska, even though you're on, I don't know what Denver's considered, Western, Central U.S., even though you're not like moving from East Coast to that point, that's a huge move. How do you physically and mentally get you and your family ready for such a big life move like that?
Well, it was July 4th, 2010. My daughter at the time was 12 years old. She and I jumped on a plane, flew up here, and looked at this place that we're staying in right now, this old 1960s log cabin. And as I said, my wife was still back in Denver with our other two kids. So we walked around this property and it was in shambles. It just needed so much work. It was pouring down rain. It was everything you can possibly imagine in terms of just not being a place that you should be moving a family to. And at the time, my daughter, she had her first cell phone. So she'd never done anything in her life, at 12 years old. So I said, okay, Nicole, this is what I want you to do. We were standing just about 10 feet from where I'm sitting right now. I said, I want you to text your mom right now, and I want you to let her know if we should move to Alaska or not. So I literally left it in the hands of a 12-year-old. And it was a Saturday morning, and she texted her mom on her little flip phone, and she said, Mom, we're moving to Alaska. And I didn't know if she was going to say yes or no. But several hours later, since in the dog training world, Saturdays are by far our busiest days, we had already left the house. We had already left the down payment on the kitchen table, and we were on our way. And Michelle got the text later on and texted us back, and she was crazy. She said, what in the world are you guys doing? You bought the house, this and that. And we said, yep, we're moving to Alaska. So that was sort of the first part of the story. But Max, it took almost a year and a half for everybody to get up here. I moved up about a month later and started working on the place, and my wife would come up every 3 months or so to, kind of lend a hand, if you will. And then the kids just sort of came up one at a time at Christmas break or summer breaks or whatever. And it took, I don't know, at least a year and a half before everybody was here. But it was worth it. The kids graduated high school here in a little school in Alaska. I think they had 60 students in their graduating class, and it's just been a winner all the way around.
Now, did you, or I should say, did the sled dogs take you to Alaska? Is that how you did the move?
We had one dog at that point, Max.
Oh my God.
I had one dog. Her name was Reagan, a little Siberian puppy we got right before we moved up. So she was the dog that started it all here in Alaska. I got her cousin, if you will, a brother or so from the same litter. A couple of months later, Bodie, my buddy Bodie, he's still with us. Reagan has passed on, but we just started doing what a lot of mushers do. We started acquiring dogs from other sled dog kennels, and before you know it, we had 30 some odd dogs in the yard, and we were ready to rock and roll.
It all goes back to rock and roller. At that point in your life, how much of your time was divided between the, Alaska Dog Works and the dog training and obedience? I'm not sure the official term for that, dog training school / company, or the efforts for mushing?
It was about 50-50. I would say it's still probably 50-50. We had to start a brand new business, obviously, with no clients, no marketing, anything like that. So that took some time. I've been a dog trainer since 1994, so I knew I could do what I had to do, but on a very limited scale because the population just is not here compared to Denver. So we jumped in that with 2 feet. And literally, the sled dogs have taught me how to be a better dog trainer because I have 30 scientific cases to look on every time to learn about behavior and body language and all that. So I truly live with a pack of sled dogs, and they have been not only my confidants and sports mates, but also my business partners as well.
It sounds like an idiom or something of like, living with a pack of sled dogs. No, that's your life. You mentioned that you had the history in dog training, but you're basically starting a brand new business in a completely different market up there. What were some key decisions you made early on that helped you grow that business and start your, dog training empire?
By far, the podcast has been our biggest driver of business. Once we started our podcast in 2009, so about a year or so before we moved to Alaska. So we already had quite a bit of that under our belt. We had a decent sized audience at that point, but we knew we had to figure out a way to reach the audience. And when you're up here, we're an hour and a half from Anchorage. So we're an hour and a half from town. So we had to figure out how we could reach people and tell stories without the typical way of doing things like hanging flyers and passing out business cards and doing all that sort of stuff. So we just kind of jumped in with 2 feet with our podcast and really started fine-tuning our avatar, if you will, our ideal client who we wanted to reach. And we just started speaking to those people. And lo and behold, people would call us up and say, hey, I listened to your podcast. I heard it on the radio and all that. And how can we get involved with training? And it's just been a case study on how podcasting can help small businesses.
It has been. And I know that you've been generous enough to share your wisdom with the awesome people at Podcast Movement and other podcast conferences. And Podcast Movement, shout out, goes back full circle to your hometown of Denver or your previous town of Denver where we met in the first place. So it's really, really cool and inspiring. And what was it about podcasting and First Paw Media / Dogworks Radio? What is it that convinced you that this would be a good place to dive in and get the word out?
Well, in Denver, we were paying about $1,500 a month for Yellow Page ads. For folks that do not know what Yellow Pages are, it's a huge book of phone numbers that you used to flip through to call. And we were paying that in Denver every month. And we had to figure out there had to have been a better way. So this was, again, 2009. So we just canceled the ad and bought a couple of cheap mics from Guitar Center, hooked them up in our training center there in Denver, and just started podcasting. And it was really just a Q&A with our clients. They would come up and say, hey, why is my dog pulling on the leash or jumping on the counters or whatever? And that became our podcast. And we've sort of refined it since then over the years and really started telling stories. And as I mentioned, we figured out who we should be speaking to. We're not speaking to every dog owner in the world. We're speaking to a very specific client in order to tell those stories to. And as you know, Max, podcasting is perfect for telling stories, long form audio, all of those sorts of things that you're just not going to get from TikTok or Instagram or something like that. You have the ability to really, really hone in and develop your message, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've talked about your business has really been a case study or several different case studies on, trying and error and learning and growing from there. And it's the same thing in the podcasting world as well. And you're somebody that's you and the team and your podcasts are now like into millions of download. Like you're in really, really cool. Well, you already live in really cool, unique territory, but like you're literally in really cool, unique podcasting territory as well. Thinking back to just that first show. So that first show, that was Dogworks Radio, correct?
Yes.
You've since expanded, but what has been the key in addition to, kind of just focusing on your audience and the Q&A there? What has been the big driver on growing that podcast over time and over so many years?
By far, consistency. When we headed off to Podcast Movement, we were trying to figure out, have we ever missed a week in all of those weeks since January of 2009? Because I didn't want to get on stage and, say, hey, yeah, we're doing this and doing that. And then somebody jumps back and said, nope, that's absolutely not true.
No. I was picketing outside your house back. I was picketing outside your cabin back in August 2014. That was a terrible second week of August.
Yes, well, we have never missed a week. So I don't know how many weeks that is since 2009, but I think by far consistency. So many podcasters start out and, they'll release a season or two, then take a 6-month break or whatever, and then nobody knows who they are. And that could be said for any type of marketing. If you're consistent, you have a good message, you stick with it, and you're in it for the long haul, you're going to win. And winning means different things to different people, but by far, if you just stick with it, good things will come.
If you build it, they will come. They should put that line in a movie, I believe. But that's remarkable, that consistency. And you hear it time and time again how important it is in the podcast world and just content creation world in general. I'm a huge sucker for alliteration always. But what has been the difference that has allowed you to be that consistent to the point that you don't even know if you missed a week? Like, where so many people struggle to, even go a year or a few months without missing.
Well, first off, you got to make the time for it. We've recorded episodes at 2:00 in the morning. We've recorded episodes in hotel rooms underneath a blanket. We've done the whole 9 yards. You just have to make the time for it. And of course, we do some batching of episodes and whatnot. We were on the road for 2.5 weeks here just a couple of weeks ago when we talked about podcast movement and our rock and roller coaster tour. But you have to find the time, and it goes for anything. If you're trying to build a business, and I know this is a build business podcast, you have to find the time. I don't care if you're tired. I don't care if you're late for dinner or the kids are crying or whatever. You have to figure out where in your day can you fit the time to help your business grow. And if you find that time, it'll work. And as we said, if we build it, it will come. I think my more important metaphor is you have to be hungry. I mean, you have to be Las Vegas buffet hungry in order to make a business grow. And if you're not, it's going to remain stagnant. And again, a business growth is different to different people. But if you want to be able to support yourself, you got to be hungry.
That's a new level of hungry. That is an incredible metaphor. It's so true. It's also a painful metaphor when you think about that. You said sometimes you have to record while even if you're late for dinner, and sometimes I think that's the most difficult because it's, oh man, gotta wait for food. But no, I'm with you. Sometimes it's, even if you're running late, you just got to knock stuff out, and it might suck in the moment if you're a few hours delayed for something or late getting to something, but you're much better off than if you decide to start getting used to the habit of letting your listeners down, and that's not a habit that's going to bode well for any podcast. So great tips there. Another thing that really helps grow that you've done masterfully, and this ties back to not just Dogworks Radio but First Paw Media and really like your podcasting empire, if you will, is add more shows into the mix. And what's really cool is some of the shows that you have touched, both podcasting and radio. So it's kind of a cool hybrid here. But what's kind of like your creative process, you and team, you and family even, for adding more shows to the mix that like fit within that overall vibe you're going for, but are also different enough that there's a purpose for them?
Of course, we do a lot of dog-centric podcasts. Of course, First Paw Media fits right into that. So pretty early on, Max, we had people reaching out to us and they said, hey, how can we reach our audience with a podcast? And of course, we would help them out in one way or the other, whether it be coaching or hosting or whatever. We would help them out. And we've worked with several podcasts over the years to do that and reach their message, whether it be rescues or sled dog races or whatever. I think that those people were just so generous with allowing us to be their right-hand man, if you will, their coach, their mentor or whatever. And I'm a firm believer in having mentors and coaches. I think if you can afford it as a business, spend your money on good coaching or finding great mentors. And I think that would help you out along the way, because then all of a sudden, Max, you have other partners on your team that are willing to do the work with you. They're willing to do the production or the hosting of their own content, and you have that to fall back on. I think that really helps us out. And of course, you got to find partners that align with your mission or your values or whatever. And once you find that, now all of a sudden you have a team of people that are willing to work with you and for you.
And I think that ties perfectly into one of like the big hairy Las Vegas buffet questions that I've been wanting to ask you is how in the world, when you're spending so much time on your podcasts and even podcast production clients and that whole side of things, which some people would say it's marketing, some people say it's a lifestyle. Got that tattooed on me? I'm just kidding. But when you spend so much time on the focus on podcasting, in addition to finding good coaches and mentors, I don't know, I said that weird. How are you able to, keep up with the day-to-day of your actual, your dog training business and your other day-to-day, service responsibilities?
That's a good question because it truly is a 24-hour job. It is a lifestyle. We sort of divide it up into sections like you would with a real job. Some people, commute an hour to work.
Hold on. You just discredit. You're saying you don't have a real job now?
Do not have a real job. I've never had a boss in my life, and I think that's helped out a little bit. But getting back to sort of that schedule, some people, they drive an hour to work. They work from 9 to noon as that sort of first shift, and they take an hour for lunch and then do it in the afternoon. And of course, do it the drive home at night. And that's sort of how we do it. We wake up early in the morning and do all of our dog chores for an hour and a half or so. Then I do most of my behind the scenes work, if you will, the marketing and the advertising and the books and all of that. I do that in the morning. And then we meet with clients in the afternoon. We just sort of bang those out as we're going. And then at night, sometimes we're able to sit back and watch Netflix. Other times we're recording podcasts or working on websites or whatever. And it just sort of goes. And I think that's sort of a blessing and a curse of being self-employed is we aren't able to disconnect. We're not allowed to, jump in the car and drive to the office and, put on a button-up shirt and a tie and, check out at 5:00. In our life, there is no checkout. You just sort of just go. And when winter rolls around and dog mushing season rolls around, it's a whole new animal. And that's nothing to sneeze at because then we're training 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day on the back of a dog sled. And we're typically doing that in the middle of the night. We'll eat dinner and hook up a team at 9 p.m. and get back at 2 a.m. And then start it all over again and just sort of keep the machine oiled, if you will.
You said a whole new animal, and I think you mean a Siberian Husky or Alaskan Husky or something there. It's a whole new animal. You didn't even probably plan that one. But yeah, it's so different than, a typical corporate job like that. But you've done an incredible job of making sure that you, in addition to your business and the things you do on the day-to-day, which you clearly love and clearly are very passionate about, you and your wife, your family, like you make time to do the other areas that you're super passionate about as well. Like we talked from the get-go about the rock and roller tour, rock and roller coasters. And you mentioned as well, like you did 2.5 week trip right after Podcast Movement. How have you structured the business, at least, at the time of this recording, to the point that you are able to actually get away from your 35 dogs and all your, client dogs, if that's a term, as well?
Well, first off, we have a huge support network, and that's one person, Max. That's our daughter, Nicole. She came back to work with us after a few-year hiatus. She had to find her way, if you will. You know how you are when you're in your early 20s. She came back to work for us a few years ago, and she is literally our right-hand woman right now. She is the one that makes the whole thing go when we're gone. So she is there when we are not, but it all comes back to we are busting our butts all year long in order to be able to take that time off. And a lot of people say, how in the world do you find so much time to travel? Like we did a 1.5 week trip in Belize this spring, and we did our 2-week tour in the summer. And first off, we figure out a way to include work or meeting clients on our trips. So we do that. So we'll meet with service dog clients or whatever on our road trips. So then it becomes a write-off, which is really nice. But also, when you're working 24 hours a day, 300 days a year, it allows you to take those extra 2 or 3 weeks off at a time to do what you have to do.
Yeah, that's exactly how we structured Podcast Movement this year as well. Like we were so glad that we went there not only for the conference, but we got, smaller sample size, but the weekend before we got to hang with my cousins, shout out Jeff and Emma, and we stayed at their place and we did, we hiked around Golden and we got to explore more of Denver. We went to a Rockies game. We saw a double rainbow at the Rockies game. That was pretty cool. But it was so nice to do that right before Podcast Movement as well. So it's not just, conference and like an amazing conference, but it's not just that and, go for all those days in a row. You have like the true time to unplug leading up to that as well. And so you've kind of done that on steroids. To tie it back to baseball. No, I couldn't resist. Not speaking of steroids, but speaking of Podcast Movement, as I mentioned earlier, that's where Robert and I met, and I was just endlessly fascinated from our first conversation at the speaker party, which was really cool. Robert was kind enough to attend my session in person, and on the fly, I was able to incorporate some references or a joke about Robert in the actual session. So that was all a good time. But if you're interested in grabbing the slides from my Podcast Movement 2023 session, you can do so at maxpodcasting.com/PM23. That's maxpodcasting.com/PM23. You can sign up, get the slides there. It will sign you up for the Podcasting to the Max newsletter as well. Of course, unsubscribe at any time. You're always welcome to do that. But absolutely love speaking on giving your guests their best ever show experience. So you can grab that maxpodcasting.com/PM23. Now, let's start training for the Iditarod. Speaking of traveling around to different places or moving at laser fast speed, laser and blazer, I'd love to talk Iditarod. You might not believe it, but you're the first Wild Business Growth podcast guest who's ever attempted or trained for the Iditarod, at least to my knowledge. I'm sure people have done some pretty cool excursions kind of in that sled dog space, but no one's quite taken it to heart as much as you are. So at the time of this recording, what's your goal of Iditarod? Is it, do you have a time where you want to knock it out in your life by, or is it kind of just like a bucket list thing? Like, what's your perspective for it?
Well, as I said, we moved up here in 2010 to chase that Iditarod dream. I'm still chasing it. I've had the opportunity to do it several times, and a lot of it comes down to time and money and, all of that. Thankfully, my daughter, Nicole, the very woman that we just mentioned, she ran Junior Iditarod twice as a teenager. So that's sort of a big hat hanger, if you will, for our kennel. And I think that's helped out a lot. Recently, I started teaching at the universities here, University of Alaska and Alaska Pacific University, and teaching dog mushing to students. So currently, that happens right during Iditarod time. So I have a 3-year contract to do that. So I'm thinking, Max, that in the next 4 or 5 years or so, I will do Iditarod. But there's a cool fact. In the oldest rookie to ever start Iditarod was 72 years old. And I'm only 52 now. So I still have 20 years to get to the starting line, if you will. So I think I have plenty of time. And we'll just see how business goes and things rock and roll over the next few years. But don't be too excited to not see me up there in the next 5 years or so.
That's awesome. Well, you got plenty of years. You got plenty of dog years as well. So yeah, you got plenty of time. But that's something so cool. It's like, it feels like training for an Ironman or ultra marathon or something like that, where it's just such a big, famous thing that it's obviously it takes so much time and energy and cost as well to actually prepare for it. But if you do it, that's a hang your hat moment if you can actually participate and compete in that as well. But that's amazing. Shout out Nicole. That's really, really cool that she's done the junior one a couple times. So maybe speaking from your own mushing and training, or maybe it's from your daughter's perspective with the junior Iditarod as well. For anybody who's not familiar, just in case there's somebody in the audience right now that maybe hasn't trained for Iditarod before, what does that training regimen, that preparation regimen look like for a race of that caliber?
Like I said earlier, it is very long hours on the trail in absolutely freezing temperatures. Like I said, we typically will start a training run at 8 o'clock, 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So after dinner and everything else, when most people are kicking back watching Netflix, we're out in the wilderness with our dogs, and we'll hook up a team of 10 or 12 dogs and just take off. We're lucky enough to have 200 or 300 miles of trails right off our back door. So we could literally just run for hours and hours. And we're out there in the winter here, especially January or February. It's typically 25, 30 below zero, 6, 7, 8 feet of snow on the ground. And we're just out there, just in the middle of the thicket, if you will. And we spend a lot of time with our dogs. You talked about training for Ironmans and stuff like that. We're doing human marathon type runs every night. So 20, 30, 40 miles a night with our dogs. And we're doing that day in and day out throughout the whole winter. Our current training schedule is 2 days on, 1 day off. And that's 7 days a week from pretty much October until whenever the snow melts, whether it be late March, early April. And we'll do, I don't know, 2 or 3 thousand miles on the back of a dog sled every night for the entire winter.
How much of success in, like a quote unquote running of the Iditarod would you say comes down to the performance of the dogs versus the performance of the musher?
It doesn't matter about the musher at all. The dogs don't care. You could fall off at mile 1 and they'll continue until they fall over. So it's sort of tongue in cheek because obviously the human has to take care of the dogs, but it's the dogs that are the true athlete. It's like having a very fine-tuned sports car, a heck of a lot easier to drive than a rust bucket Ford Escort or something like that. So if you have a Formula One car, it's a lot easier. But yeah, the dogs are the ones that are doing it, and you're literally the jockey. You're the one that's telling them what to do and where to go. But otherwise, it's the dogs that are doing the job.
I was literally just thinking about horse racing, and you said jockey. So we're on the same wavelength here. You're probably a little bit up ahead of me in the Iditarod, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And these dogs aren't such incredible athletes. How do you decide when a dog is ready for game time, ready to run in a race like that?
We could probably break that down on a bunch of different levels, but if you think about it in business terms, it's building that perfect cohesive team. You have to have an excellent HR department. You have to have a good advertising department. You have to have good leadership. You have to have all of that. And that goes right back to a very well-oiled dog team. And I always equate it to football. You have to have your Tom Brady. That's your lead dog. You have to have somebody that's going to make the decisions and just be the superstar. You have to have those sort of jocks, the offensive linemen in football. Those are your wheel dogs. Those are the ones that are doing the grunt work. And then you have your up and coming stars, and those are your swing dogs. Those are the dogs right behind the leaders. They're the ones that are going to step up. And if you watch the Monday Night Football game last night at the time of recording, the superstar Aaron Rodgers of the New York Jets went down in play 3 or something like that with a torn Achilles. And what happened? The next guy stepped up and took over. And that's how it sort of is with a dog team. Those dogs have to be able to perform and fire on all cylinders at all time. And it just goes back to genetics and will and drive and all of that. These dogs are born to do this. It's not taking your golden retriever and hooking them up and saying, yep, let's run to Nome. These guys were born and bred to do this. And, it takes a lot of time and a lot of skill. And of course, if I've been dealing with dogs since the 90s, if anything, I know how to pick a good dog over a bad dog. And I've been able to do that. And fortunately, we have some pretty high caliber dogs.
I like that analogy of the musher, is that you're kind of in charge of assembling the team, but really you leave it to your team to excel for you. I am curious though, as a musher, what would you say is the most challenging part during the actual race or during the actual legs of the race?
Probably sleep deprivation is probably high up on the list. When you're out there in those type of temperatures, and racing in particular is very tough on the human side of things because the dogs will just go. They are comfortable of doing what they have to do. But as the coach, as the the human side of it, you don't get a chance to take a break. You have to take care of them when it's time for them to rest, and that's true leadership. You have to step up. If you think about this in business terms, it's the guy that's burning the midnight oil. It's the CEO that's in the C-suite that's pouring over the numbers when everybody else is out at happy hour or something like that. They're the ones that are making the decisions, and that's sort of the human side of that equation. Is you just have to be focused. And sleep deprivation is tough. Financing it is very tough. It's a very expensive lifestyle. Our dog food bill alone is about $2,500 a month just to feed them. That's very expensive. So you have to be creative in all aspects of being that part of that team. And I think that's what the most difficult part of it is.
I mean, this applies super well to both when you're mushing as well as when you're leading a business. How do you find the willpower and, I guess, mental sanity to keep going when you are sleep deprived, when you have financial pressure, when you have these big roadblocks like that, but you got to keep going along?
Honestly, there is no time to second guess. You just got to do it. You got to figure out a way. And when you have people depending on you, whether it's in business or in dog mushing, or when you have a pack of sled dogs down there who need fed every day, it's the same as being on a farm. You can't say, oh, well, we'll figure out another way tomorrow. As they say, the baby's got to eat. And that's true in dog mushing as well. You can't take uncalculated chances. You have to be able to figure out a way to do it. You have to be hungry, as we mentioned, and you just have to go for it. You have to have grit. We talked about sleep deprivation. You become a different individual when you've been on the trail at 30 below for 3 days without any sleep. You're gonna figure out what your true mettle is. And when you figure that out, a lot of things in life become pretty easy, whether it be business decisions or, little life curveballs or whatever. You find out what you're truly made of when you're in the middle of nowhere.
Hungry like the wolf, or as some say, hungry like the husky. That actually should be the original saying. As if you didn't have enough weird talents or party tricks, let's get to a segment called The Unusual. So pet peeves, quirks, weird talents. This, again, could be hours and hours long. This could actually be a segment as long as the entire Iditarod. But we're gonna start with quirks. What's something a little bit quirky about your personality that your wife, kids, team, collaborator, somebody calls you out for, but it's just who you are?
Oh God, you probably already guessed this, but I am probably about as much of as a detail-oriented perfectionist as you could possibly get. I way too overanalyze everything, so that's by far a huge quirk, and it's a blessing and a curse. When you're constantly figuring out the variables at everything. I'm one of those guys, Max, that'll watch a movie and I've got the IMDb and the Wikipedia open at the same time, trying to figure out where they filmed it and who was in it and what the budget was and all that.
And just shout out my wife Dana and I, because we're totally the same thing. Like, she has the actual IMDb app. I just Google the actors, actresses all the time, but I can't see somebody and go, oh, that's the person from so and so, and and not look it up to confirm. We're totally the same way, but I'm with you.
I will stop a movie 15 times, and that probably pisses my wife off more than anything, as I'm constantly stopping the movie to look something up or whatever. So yeah, by far that's my biggest quirk.
Speaking of pissing your wife off, no, I'm just kidding. Speaking of being pissed off, pet peeves. What is something from your perspective that, besides the internet being down and you can't look up something on IMDb or Wikipedia, what is something that just grinds your gears a little bit, takes you off a little bit?
Inaccountability. People that are not accountable for their actions. I think that's a big pet peeve of mine, especially in today's world where everybody thinks they should have a second pass or, a do-over or whatever. Live up to your actions. Do what you have to do. Be accountable. Show up on time. Be there when you say you're going to be there, and don't give excuses. Be there when you're supposed to be there.
And that is the word of the day, in accountability. We made it. You stumbled onto it, so congratulations. You win this podcast interview. And then weird talents. Well, first of all, what can't you do? But second of all, what's something that's kind of like more of a party trick, or like it has no impact on your business, but you just have a knack for doing X?
I was a musician in college. I thought I was going to be the next coming of Pearl Jam or Nirvana or Alice in Chains or something like that. Started playing guitar when I was a teenager, and that led into a pretty decent career on the club and bar scene in college. And of course, that led into podcasting and everything that we do with it. But I can play a pretty mean guitar if I have to. And it doesn't come in handy today in 2023, but I would love to get the guys together again and jam a little bit if we could.
Well, let's jam our way to jamming our radar from Spaceballs. Now, let's jam our radar to rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Yes.
All right, let's get wild. Let's jam those radars. What is the most beautiful sight you have ever seen in Alaska?
Northern Lights in the middle of nowhere, 35 below zero with my dog team.
Wow, that was like a poem by Edgar Allan Poe. That was really good. What is the coolest experience that you've ever had outside of Alaska?
Scuba diving. You said outside of Alaska, so let me include Alaska because it's a pretty dang cool scene, Max.
Oh man. Okay, yeah, I'll give it to you.
I was learning how to scuba dive several years ago in Alaska. It was February. It was snowing. We were doing our open water dives, and we were down at about 30 below in a place called Whittier, Alaska. And we looked up, and we could see the snow falling on the surface of the water. And I tapped one of my instructors, and he told me later on that that's called margarita snow. And by far, one of the coolest things I've ever seen is snow falling on top of the water when you're down at about 60 feet in the middle of winter.
That was like written by Kurt Vonnegut. I'm just going to keep going here. That was beautiful. I'm adding things to my bucket list throughout this interview, so thank you for that. I know Huskies are, synonymous with sled dogs and Iditarod. What is it about Huskies in general that makes them just absolute powerhouses in the sport?
Independence. They are by far one of the most independent breeds of dogs, and I've probably trained every dog breed that is recognized by the American Kennel Club. Siberian Huskies in particular just don't give a crap. They will give you the finger and do what they have to do. They are fiercely loyal, fiercely independent.
And speaking of breed, what is your favorite Nirvana song other than Smells Like Teen Spirit?
Ah, my goodness. I would probably have to say probably Bleach. I like that one. I know there's one that I can't think of the name of, but there's a lot of good Nirvana songs, but there's a lot of really bad Nirvana songs as well. Kurt gets a lot of credit, but they put out a lot of crap too.
Yeah. Hey, that's a good lesson in content creation, and you sometimes you got to put out a lot of crap to put some literally game-changing songs. I always I don't know if this is the one you're thinking of, but for whatever reason I just love Drain You. I think it's like such a great song. I don't know why. It's just really, really good stuff. But you're like, that's the crap. No,
they're all of course all of their big ones are hits for a reason, but there's some good ones out there. I'm a much bigger Alice in Chains fans than I am Nirvana, so we could talk about that forever. But there's some good stuff from back in the grunge era. That's my jam for sure.
I was just talking to my dad about that. For whatever reason, as each year goes on, I like Alice in Chains more and more. I think it's something that, like, when you're young, they don't appeal to you as much, and then over time, there's some, I don't know, they got that grungy, and Lane Staley's voice just so unique. Like, it's a really, I feel you there. That's a good one. What is the best way to stay warm when it's 30 below or below?
Oh God, you can never have too much good gear. We were down in Phoenix a couple of weeks ago, and it was 112 degrees in the shade. And I remember telling my wife, I said, there's absolutely no way in the world I could live here in Phoenix because there's just no way to cool off. But in Alaska, when it is 30 below, if you have good gear, it makes all the difference. I have a really fancy down coat that I paid way too much money for. That'll get me through anything. And it has been a lifesaver.
And speaking of lifesaver, your wife, I know that you have an incredible story of meeting in a chat room. which I think is like you're ahead of your time because I think now everyone's meeting on dating apps. So okay, kudos to you for being pioneers in that space as well. But what kind of chat room was it?
Oh, that's a good story. It sort of goes full circle here, Max. It was October of 1999. Unfortunately, my wife's husband had just passed away in a motorcycle accident. So she had three little kids, the same little kids that we've talked about this entire time. So she was a single mom at the time, and she was trying to figure out how to get her dog to pull her kids in a wagon up a hill. They couldn't quite figure it out. And we were on a AOL or a Yahoo chat room. It was a Saturday morning, and she jumped in and I was there, and she said, "Does anybody know how I can teach my dog how to pull my kids in a wagon?" And I jumped right in and answered her question, and we hit it off. And I remember saying to my brother, I said, "Hey, I've met this girl in Colorado. I'm thinking about taking this a step further." And he said, "Dude, you need to fly out and make sure that she's a woman, not a dude." This is back in 1990. Because you never know about internet stalkers. And that, I was kind of naive back in the day. So I booked a flight to Denver and met her and her family and made sure she was who she was and not, an internet stalker, if you will. And as they say, the rest is history. So yeah, I think that meeting her in the chat room and then just flying out a week or two later and meeting her in person sealed the deal.
Wow. Well before the time of Manti Te'o. Well, Robert, absolutely incredible, just all around incredible story from meeting your wife to everything you do to help dogs and dog owners and other dog trainers, as well as everything in the podcasting empire space as well. Thank you so much for all you do. Thank you so much for coming on. Where is the easiest way for people to find out more about what you do and listen to any of your shows or hit you up for business?
Best place is just search my name on any social media, Robert Forto. That's Forto. That's pretty much my handle on everything. And I post all the time. I'm active on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, and just about everywhere else. If you find me, I will definitely answer your emails or questions or whatever.
And I can vouch for that. Robert Forto, also known as Balto. No, I'm just kidding. I actually did research. A little fun fact: that movie Balto, obviously named after the famous dog in the Iditarod, came out 1995 December, because I was looking up and I remember it being one of my earliest memories. And it turns out I was 3.5 at that time that movie came out, and I still remember being in the theaters and actually the power going out during the movie. I guess that's why I remember it, but that might be my earliest memory ever. So not quite as hands-on as your dog Iditarod memories, but pretty close as well. But Robert, thank you again. Last thing, final thought, stage is yours. It could be a quote, just kind of words to live by. Send us home here.
Never forget your dreams is something I live by. Definitely go after it. Do whatever you can to make it happen.
Making it happen all around the world, and especially in Alaska, all parts of Alaska. Robert, thank you so much for all you do, for sharing your business tips, sled dog tips, all things travel and inspiration. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite podcast app. And tell a friend about the podcast. And then go start training for the Iditarod with them. That'd be a pretty cool life story, wouldn't it? You can also find us on Good Pods, where there are good podcasts. And for any help with podcast production, you can learn more at maxpodcasting.com. And sign up for the Podcasting to the Max newsletter. That's at maxpodcasting.com/newsletter. Until next time, and next Iditarod, let your sled dogs run wild.
Bring on the bongos!